Right, so this next installment is going to be covering the art PowerPoint and from the list numbers 61 through 75. And so we start with Thomas Eakins. His work is called The Gross Clinic, in which a young man is being operated on by a team of surgeons, as you can see here. And the fellow that is here is the head doctor and instructor, and you can see all kinds of medical students and likewise in the background watching it. And down here on the left is the mother of the person being operated on, overwhelmed by it all. But nevertheless, it's called the Gross Clinic, and that fellow is Dr. Gross, I think. I could get that wrong, but nevertheless, it comes up quite a bit. I'm always reminded of the Rembrandt painting, The Anatomy Lesson, or if you would like the full thing, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp by Rembrandt whenever I look at the Gross Clinic. So we move on to the next artist, and that would be Edouard Manet, an impressionist. And do not confuse Manet with Monet, who is going to, presumably in my PowerPoint, follow him so that we do not obviously make a distinction. So this caused a scandal in the French salon when it first appeared because of, obviously, the naked woman in the foreground being accompanied by two men, and she is absolutely at ease. But nevertheless, it's called Luncheon on the Grass, and it was an absolute scandal when it appeared for the first time on display. Note you have the basket of food down here in the front, the woman with absolutely no clothes on and brazenly looking directly at the viewer. In the background, there's another woman rummaging around in something, and like I said, she's just sitting there comfortably with the two men, and it was rather scandalous. But it comes up quite a bit, both as a toss-up answer and as a clue for the answer when it is Manet himself. Olympia, which harkens back to Venus of Urbino, and so you can see the similarities in them both. However, what makes this one a little bit different is that you have the maid of African descent. You also, instead of a dog, which you saw in Venus of Urbino, you have on the right-hand side a cat, a black cat, and it shows the title character Olympia resting at ease, and even more scandalously, the little bits of clothes that she has on highlights even more so her nudity. She has on shoes and a bracelet and a string necklace, a little bit of flower in her hair. And if you compare it with the Venus of Urbino, you see several similarities. There's a maid in the background, the same exact kind of recline. However, for the Olympia, she's a bit more shy, because, like say, the last one was nude, just confidently and brazenly staring at the viewer. So that would be Olympia. And then you have the bar at the Folies Bergère by Manet, in which you can see, presumably maybe, the artist himself in the reflection of the glass at the back. This is the glass behind the bar, and you obviously have in the very center the barmaid herself. But this is the bar at the Folies Bergère. And we move on to then Monet. So Manet, you have those three paintings, but there are lots of others that you could look up on Quizbowl or QB Reader to perhaps power him. He comes up quite a bit. Nevertheless, we have Claude Monet, the man who is responsible for the painting to give the whole movement of Impressionism its name, and that would be Impression Sunrise. And so instead of the detail that you see with something along the lines of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood or those before here, you get instead this kind of blurriness. And there's been actually a lot of talk that perhaps it was some sort of eye condition that might have led to this kind of painting. But nevertheless, this is the painting Impression Sunrise that gave the whole movement its nomenclature. But at any rate, you have Impression Sunrise. You have Rouen Cathedral, in which he painted it at all different kinds of day to indicate the reflection off of the cathedral at Rouen. So you have several renditions of Rouen Cathedral. Of course, you cannot talk about Monet without water lilies at his garden in Giverny. But nevertheless, that is a clue that will come up very often for Monet. And we move on to Renoir. So again, you have Rouen Cathedral, you have Impression Sunrise, and of course, as always, water lilies. Again, the name of the garden is Giverny. Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Renoir comes up quite a bit for his dance at Le Moulin de la Galette that you can see here with all these folks at this gathering. You have also for Renoir, Luncheon of the Boating Party. This probably is the one that comes up the most. And you can see it again. It shows some sort of a social scene with lots of characters, just like the dance at Le Moulin de la Gillette. I'm sure I'm doing a bad job with the pronunciation of the French. But Luncheon of the Boating Party is probably his number one thing that comes up for him. So we move on now to Cézanne, Paul Cézanne. He is the master of the still life. Still life, as hopefully you know. You have also the card players for him. This is not to be confused with Caravaggio's The Card Sharps, but nevertheless the card players. But there it is, still life with a curtain, which it shows things like fruit or other non-living things on a table and set about and so forth and so on. But that is, of course, Cézanne. We move on to Henri Rousseau. He has some other paintings. The Repast of the Lion. A repast is a fancy word for a meal or a dinner. And here you can see down at the bottom the lion in a jungle-like floral and lush plant setting eating something. You have The Dream, which is again in somewhat of an exotic kind of jungle setting with the orange tree in the background that you see. The Sleeping Gypsy, again with another animal in the painting. And we move on to Paul Gauguin. I call him the painter of the tropics as my title because he is going to be incredibly famous for having moved to the South Pacific, particularly to French Polynesia and particularly to Tahiti. So here you have, obviously, scenes from that setting in French Polynesia in Tahiti. Where did we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Which you see all of the natives. He is also responsible for Yellow Christ. This very often will be used as a clue in a toss-up in which Gauguin is your answer line. And here is Tahitian Women on the Beach, two Tahitian women, both of them by Gauguin, where he had spent quite a bit of time. So for Gauguin, the bread and butter that will come up for him when you look him up is Yellow Christ particularly, and the Tahitian clues that come along with it. We move to Georges Seurat, a post-impressionist master of pointillism. Pointillism is the style of, obviously, painting by using little dots of various different colors, and the farther you get away, you can obviously make it out. So that's a self-portrait. There it is, holding some Mentos, it looks like. And that by far. You can find it in the Art Institute of Chicago, and it also plays a role in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, in which the title character Ferris, his friend, leans in farther and farther and farther to see the individual little dots. But Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte. I left out the end in La Grande. It's not La Grade, but La Grande. But it's always notable. It comes up quite a bit as an answer line. The painting itself, Seurat, always comes up as an answer line as well very often. But you have the little dog down in the front here. You have a woman with an umbrella, a parasol, a monkey on a leash, another little dog, and other elements of the painting. Do please take it in and stare at it so that you could hopefully be able to get the clues early and get the question right. But that is Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte. Next, we come up to Auguste Rodin, who was the teacher of Brancusi, who will be next, but Rodin comes up quite a bit in Quizbowl. I mean, a lot. And here is his perhaps most well-known piece, The Gates of Hell. These doors here, not to be confused with the Ghibertis, The Gates of Paradise, depict various different scenes from the Inferno of Dante. And so you have all of that. That's why they're called the Gates of Hell. You have here the three shades of hell at the top, and the centerpiece above it is supposedly an image of Dante himself, which of course is known as in and of itself as Le Penseur, or the thinker. So lots of things going on here. In the clues about the Gates of Hell, you always have the three shades usually mentioned up at the top. But nevertheless, this is Rodin's, I would argue, most famous piece, including in and of itself the most famous thinker that you see here. He is a sculptor. There it is, isolated. And you have several of them all over the place. The one that I have seen personally is in the Vatican, but several different versions therein of the thinker. And he sits, does he, right here on the opening or the top of the Gates of Hell. The burghers of Calais. Very often, this will be a clue given in the Rodin toss-up of these folks who are in all sorts of trouble, giving up a city in some sort of a wartime setting. I forget exactly what it is, but it would be worth your while to take 5 minutes to take a look. Look it up on Wikipedia, burghers of Calais, exactly what's going on here. But very often, early in the clue, you will have this one mentioned. Age of Bronze. This one is brought up often, for it is often mentioned that he was accused, was Rodin, of actually casting from a live model instead of making a plaster model, which is how you cast bronze. You make the plaster that you would then pour the bronze with. That he was accused of using a live model with the plaster because it was so lifelike and so good for bronze. But this is The Age of Bronze by Rodin. This is the monument to Honoré de Balzac, one of the famous French authors of the Human Comedy, but nevertheless, that is his monument to Balzac. And his Kiss, which was a bit scandalous when it first came out. You can see that here it is in the medium of marble. Now, we do not want to confuse Rodin's The Kiss with his student, Brancusi, and I think he's Romanian, by the way. He is a sculptor and a student to Rodin, and so there is his Kiss, quite a bit different, as you can see, but Brancusi comes up quite a bit, particularly for the next item, I think, that is in the PowerPoint that we see here, and that is Bird in Space. And go and look it up, and that it is got a story behind it, and that there was some sort of tax to be levied upon it, or something like that, when he was bringing it into one country from the other. It might be the United States. I wish I knew the details. But I do know that it has come up quite a bit as clues in Quizbowl, because there was debate as to whether this was art or whether it was like raw material. And so you can see here it is going to, this sculptor, titled Bird in Space, give a sense, an aura of movement and speed and all of the velocity that comes along with looking at it and what it is like. So Brancusi comes up quite a bit, because especially in the background of this item not necessarily being considered by governmental authorities as actual art, but rather raw materials, which would make it obviously subject to some sort of an excise tax of some sort. Now we have a Winslow Homer. We move into the timeline of closer to the modern day. So you can see he looks like around the turn of the century. And these are his works. He's associated quite a bit with the American Northeast, New England particularly. Here is Breezing Up a Fair Wind, showing some youths on a sailing ship on a nice-looking day. You can tell that it is New England, particularly maybe Massachusetts, because it's Gloucester. That is the boat, obviously associated with. Snap the Whip, in which they are playing that game that children often do of slinging one person one after the other until you can see the anchor over here, slinging them all the way around to where the kinetic energy is finally transmitted all the way to the end, and the poor little kids at the end are slung off. I like Snap the Whip quite a bit. And the Gulf Stream. This comes up quite a bit. They will talk about the water spout in the back, the poor fellows surrounded by sharks that you see here, the man of African descent on the boat in the troubled waters. But this is the Gulf Stream by Winslow Homer. So make sure you're familiar with those three, particularly for Homer, and the question will not go dead. We move on to Mary Cassatt. She comes up a lot. I know I say that for most of these artists, but this is why I made the PowerPoint, because these are the fundamental artists. If we were making a comprehensive one for a higher level, like collegiate or whatnot, when the canon expands, it would be so much more. But as the basics, this is it. So Cassatt was a friend of Degas. She is an American. And her most famous work, I would argue, is Child's Bath, that you can see there. She is an Impressionist. She is an American. She is a friend of Degas. All of those are clues that come up very often in Quizbowl. And here you can see her masterwork, Child's Bath, which is also located in Chicago at the Art Institute of Chicago. So there it is, Mary Cassatt, Child's Bath. Note the details. You have the picture in the foreground. You have the girl seated on presumably her mother's lap, and the little basin of water down which she is obviously getting cleansed. We have here Henri Matisse, and this is going to end it because he's actually the 76th item on the list that we have of the artist and the like. But nevertheless, he is the master of fauvism. Fauvism is a term meaning wild beasts, but it is the kind of style as put forth by Matisse in which there are bright, bold, deep, dark colors. And so his most famous work is The Dance, which you can see at full play, the dark, bold blue and the dark, bold green, the dark red of various shades for the various dancers as they are all holding hands in a circle, nudely dancing. And so that would be Henri Matisse. And so that'll bring it to an end for us here. We'll move on with Expressionism and Vasily Kandinsky in the next one. Hopefully this is helpful, that you could watch this short little video. It is not that long, but nevertheless, it is worthwhile to learn these sorts of things. Go down here to the You Gotta Know visual art and check out You Gotta Know these things and see if they match up with what I've got in my PowerPoint. Same way with QB Reader. Put these artists in there. Check your difficulties, of course, but put them in there and see the sorts of things that come up. And before you know it, you'll be a great art player at the Quizbowl level of high school. So, nevertheless, keep studying. Thanks.